Rest easy, Michigan. We now have a woke Gretchen Whitmer. She frowned on protesting when you wanted to do it because you wanted to go back to work or provide for your family. It's dangerous. You could make people sick. Until there was a crisis, at least in their minds. And to leftists, when there's a crisis, we know this, there's an opportunity. And so a police officer in Minneapolis, Minnesota, put his knee on the neck of a man and killed him. And because of that, Michigan has to change the way we police our communities. Or worse, defund the police altogether. But we'll get to that in a little bit. Gretchen Whitmer found the time to protest in Detroit and violated her own social distancing orders. Not only was she less than 6 feet away from others as she was wagging her fingers at people to do that, but she removed her mask to speak. She went on MSNBC and she said she wore a mask, quote, the whole time, which was a lie. During another stop on her national media tour to become Joe Biden's running mate, good thing coronavirus dried up, right? She spoke to The Root, which I would describe as a black power website. And the reporter brought up a protest a couple weeks ago that saw armed protesters inside the Capitol, which is legal, by the way. No laws were broken. So Terrell Jermaine Starr asked this.
I just want to ask you, what are your responses specifically to the defunding police campaigns?
Yeah, so, the spirit, as you just articulated, is really about reprioritizing and rebuilding communities, not just policing.
Can you believe that? Let's just state what I think she's really saying. She believes the Michigan State Police would kill black men if they, quote, stormed the Capitol. Let's play that again.
I just want to ask you, what are your responses specifically to the defunding police campaigns?
Yeah, so, the spirit, as you just articulated, is really about reprioritizing and rebuilding communities, not just policing.
Will she say anything to get the nomination? Will Joe Biden say anything to win the election? Have they no shame? But let's get back to Detroit and the protest that the governor participated in. She violated her own social distancing order. She removed her mask to speak and was shoulder to shoulder with other people from around the state. She was potentially spreading coronavirus around the state. Precisely what she fearmongered about just a couple weeks ago. So the Detroit News asked Whitmer's office about the apparent or obvious hypocrisy. Tiffany Brown, Whitmer's spokesperson, claimed the Unity March didn't violate her executive order because the order states, quote, nothing in this order shall be taken to abridge protections guaranteed in the state or federal constitution. That includes the right to peaceful protest, Brown told the paper. Do you see what's happening here? This is classic gaslighting. Confusing people, getting them to doubt reality, getting them to doubt what's in front of their own eyes, the evidence in front of their own eyes. So Michigan, seems to me we need to get more creative. Do you want to go to church? Organize a protest in the sanctuary. Want to gather in a group of more than 10 people? Just do it in the name of demonstrating for one of Gretchen Whitmer's pet causes, and she'll leave you alone. But what's really going on here? Where does all of this end? We know that Gretchen Whitmer wants to be Joe Biden's running mate. She hired a guy named Chris Meager who worked for Pete Buttigieg during the primaries. He is doing all of her national media. There was a picture of her on Newsweek. She's on CNN, MSNBC. The Root, all sorts of different national media outlets. She's doing everything she can to raise her national profile. That's what's going on. She wants to be the vice president of the United States of America. Let me ask you a question. After living in Michigan for the last several months, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, has this been good for Michigan? Have her policies been good for the state of Michigan? We have stunning, shocking unemployment. People out of work. We also have this situation where people who are out of work are on unemployment and in many instances are getting paid more to not work than to work. This is not a sustainable situation. I think there's this game that some people play where you get a fortune cookie and it's, you will have you will come across infinite wealth. And so you'll play this game where you add in bed to the end of the fortune. I think what could be done to sort of parody that, I think what could be done is to add, because I want to be vice president, to every statement that Gretchen Whitmer makes. So if she attacks the police and she claims that she believes the Michigan State Police would kill black protesters if they, quote, stormed the Michigan Capitol, she's saying that because she wants to be vice president. If she says anything, that is what is going on. And the unfortunate thing to me is that we in Michigan, we have to live with this. We have to live with these decisions, which I believe are political, calculated decisions for what will make her look good in the national media and in the debate for who will be Joe Biden's running mate. Is there any other explanation? She continues to have her lockdown of barbers, salons, hairstylists, even though restaurants are now open, dentist offices are open, myriad of other businesses are now open, but she refuses to, quote unquote, allow those businesses to open. Why? Why? Is it because Carl Menke keeps defeating her in court? She continues to go after him. She recently was, the Attorney General was attempting to fine him $7,500 per day for continuing to operate his business. The Whitmer administration was attempting to fine him $5,000 a day for operating his business. And a Michigan judge finally stepped in and said, stop harassing this guy. Your orders are invalid. Where does all of this end? I don't know. I'm just hoping that we will be able to have a respite and a return to reality when it's finally revealed that Gretchen Whitmer is not Joe Biden's running mate. I want to tell you about a great American company that employs veterans and makes snazzy pro-America gear, Soldier Solutions. Soldier Solutions was founded by Frank Quagliano because he wanted to keep the military spirit alive and thriving. Soldier Solutions doesn't just make their own apparel. They host veteran-owned companies that do too. My favorite shirt on the site says, "My rights don't end where your feelings begin." We need that message now more than ever, and you can find it at getsoldiergear.com. That's getsoldiergear.com. You're going to love wearing their gear. Use the promo code Kyle25 to get 25% off your order of $30 or more. That's Kyle, K-Y-L-E, number 25. GetSoldierGear.com. We'll be right back with somebody you don't want to miss, Rick Ector of Legally Armed in Detroit. This is The Kyle Olson Show. Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. I'm joined now by Rick Ector, who is owner of Legally Armed in Detroit and runs CCW classes in the city of Detroit. So, Rick, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So you were one of those armed protesters who, quote, stormed the Capitol. What is your reaction to that clip that I played in the last segment?
I was very surprised by it. The first thing that jumped out at me was the language, storming the Capitol. You know, since when is going to Lansing, you know, the capital of our state, and engaging our legislators storming the Capitol? Since when is demonstrating storming the Capitol? Storming the Capitol to me seems to, I guess if you take it literally, means that you went to the facility, you ransacked the place, you set it on fire, and you killed people, and you just engaged in all sorts of violence. And none of that actually happened. And it's a little disappointing that if the governor feels that anyone that demonstrates against her is storming the Capitol and is somehow engaging in reckless and unlawful behavior. I found that very disappointing.
So I think that you have a very interesting story. Tell me how you got into the Second Amendment movement and the belief that people need to protect themselves because the police aren't always going to be there.
You know, I was never really a big gun owner, you know, and I'll just let you know that currently I'm 52 years of age. Approximately 15, 16 years ago, I bought my first home, man. And I was always told by the elders that one of the things that you need is to own a 12-gauge shotgun just in case criminals came into your home. Well, I did have a shotgun, and I was entertaining ideas of buying a handgun and getting a concealed pistol license, but, you know, life just kept getting in the way, and I never got around to it. Mm-hmm. Well, lo and behold, one day I got robbed in my own driveway, and my life literally changed. Literally, I had a coming to God moment, and I made a prayer that if I somehow survived this incident, that I would make appropriate changes. And I did, man. I went and took a concealed pistol license training class, and I got my concealed pistol license. I bought a handgun, and I learned everything that I could about home defense and personal protection. And I kept taking additional classes, and lo and behold, not only am I a firearms instructor, but I'm a training counselor that trains people how to become firearms instructors. And I am a huge advocate of gun ownership and personal protection. So yeah, it literally changed my life.
So you own Legally Armed Detroit, in Detroit, and I read an article that said that you basically put out a message on social media that you were holding trainings. Describe that a little bit.
Yeah, if you're talking about the one annual event that I do every year, man, I saw a woman whose body was just discarded in the street after she had been sexually violated and killed. And I thought that someone should do something about that. And after waiting for someone else to do something, I just took the initiative to put out a call on social media to get as many women as I could to show up at a gun range. Fortunately for me, I was able to convince a gun range to let me use the space for free. And I was able to get various people to make donations to the program where I had guns and ammo and their actual training expertise. And I trained 50 women in one day, man. And one of the things about Detroit, you know, just within our geographical borders, there's an insane amount of women that get raped every year. So not only do we have to concern ourselves with murder, robbery, but then rape is something that happens on the order of 700 to 800 times a year. And this is just the reported number. So it's not a very safe place for women.
So I see what's going on right now is sort of a 1-2 punch where you have places like Chicago and Washington, D.C. and others that are constantly trying to restrict the Second Amendment, gun ownership, to protect yourself. But then now we have this whole defund the police movement. And so it just seems to me that politicians and these different communities are really trying to make it difficult for people to not only protect themselves, but have the police protect them. What's your take on that?
Well, you know, despite a few unfortunate incidents that occur, and we're still dealing with the aftermath of that, the killings of, for example, Arbery and others that led to the riots, man. There will always, in my opinion, be a need to have established law enforcement. Otherwise, we would have the, anarchy in the streets and survival of the fittest, and we would need everyone to be on constant guard and vigilance to protect themselves and their family against bad guys. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, the police can't be everywhere, because if they could, then we wouldn't have any freedom because we would live in a de facto police state. But I am very appreciative of the fact that we have the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms. And I'm appreciative that Michigan, including the city of Detroit, allows appropriate citizens to get the appropriate training and to be able to wield and carry a firearm for personal protection. I see it as an effective solution, and it's embracing our birthright. And I wouldn't want anything to come between that. It's something that's very essential. We talk about things that are essential these days, where gun ownership and the ability to carry a gun, in my opinion, is extremely essential.
Why do you think that's under attack?
The Second Amendment was second so it can protect the First, man. And the First Amendment is obviously the most sacred right that we have, to be able to address our government and to present our grievances and to force or to lobby our elected representatives to do our bidding. And the minute that they stop listening to us, the minute that they don't do what we ask them to do, the minute that we lose the ability to effectively replace them, then we have the Second Amendment as a last resort to exact change. And yeah, it sounds brutal, but I mean, it's real and it's relevant even today, that guns back up our rights. And without those guns, we wouldn't have the rights that we have enshrined. And yes, the First Amendment is very important. And even though there are people who are lobbying and protesting today, asking for all sorts of demands, some of them are not so outrageous and some of them border on the insane. I still recognize everyone's right to lobby their government and to ask them for changes. But the minute that you start using violence and riots to lobby on your behalf, man, then you cross the line and you engage in negative behavior, and it should be stopped and squashed. So, yeah, I'm a big supporter of Second Amendment, and I'm a big supporter of law enforcement.
So where can people sign up for your trainings?
They can find me on the internet. They can find me on social media. I'm on all the social media platforms that matter, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Detroit CCW, or my name, Rick Ector, RICK ECTOR. But the last thing that I really want to make clear, man, is that, our governor, man, she was engaging in misleading statements. She was insulting to the law enforcement community. She was engaging in pandering. The mere fact that, she would dare have the audacity to suggest that if Black people were to lobby for the respect of their rights, that they would be harmed and that something bad would come to them at the hands of the Michigan State Police, borders on insane. And it was irresponsible of her to make those suggestions.
Well, thank you, Rick. I really appreciate what you're doing and training people to protect themselves and to embrace their own rights. I don't know what is more patriotic than that. So, Rick Ector, founder of Legally Armed in Detroit, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, man. Thank you so much for having me. Enjoyed it.
This is the Kyle Olson Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. I just talked to Rick Ector, founder of Legally Armed in Detroit. He's a guy, he just told me that he was a victim of crime, and he vowed that he was never going to be a victim again. And so he took training so he could protect himself, and he didn't have to rely on the police. And what was so interesting and refreshing to be able to talk to somebody like Rick is that we have so many people in the country today who are looking to the government to protect them. And so you have Gretchen Whitmer, Joe Biden, the list goes on and on, of politicians saying this is what the government is going to do to protect you. But there's people like Rick. There are store owners in Minneapolis. There are countless people who don't have the luxury of waiting for police, and they need to be able to protect themselves. And so people like Rick Ector are stepping up, and they're saying, we're not going to be victims anymore. We're going to embrace our constitutional rights, and we're going to protect ourselves. And so Rick specifically has made it his mission to help women protect themselves in Southeast Michigan. You know, it's been said that a gun is an equalizer in terms of power, because when a woman has a gun, she can protect herself, and she, at least in terms of power, is equal, physical power, is equal to a man. So if you missed that discussion, I could talk to him a whole lot longer than I did. If you missed that discussion, please go to my YouTube page where it's posted, and please give your feedback. Now let's go back to Gretchen Whitmer talking to The Root. Again, here's Terrell Jermaine Starr and Governor Whitmer.
I just want to ask you, what are your responses specifically to the defunding police campaigns?
Yeah, so, you know, the spirit, as you just articulated, is really about reprioritizing and rebuilding communities, not just policing.
Stop. No, it's not. That may be what Gretchen Whitmer, Joe Biden, and the other politicians who are trying to have it both ways, that's what they want you to think. But the agitators in the streets want to defund the police, period. Period. It's a 1-2 punch. Restrict your access to guns to protect yourself and eliminate police as your last line of protection. The Rick Ectors of Michigan and America, they want you to be the first line of protection, to protect yourself and not have to make a call to 911 and wait for the police to arrive. In that clip, or in that appearance, Whitmer rambled on about spending on social programs, leveling the playing field, all these other nice buzzwords and phrases that leftists like to say. And Terrell Jermaine Starr asked again.
So do you support the defunding? Because, for example, in Minneapolis, Minneapolis City Council is proposing to redo what policing is, but specifically, do you think that the defunding, would you be someone who supports the defunding movement, which is to take money specifically from police departments and put them into education, for example?
I think you do all those other things, you don't need all the money that's going to the police department. So yeah, I mean, the spirit of it, I do support that spirit of it.
I don't know about you, but Whitmer seemed pretty clear to me. She agrees with the spirit of defund the police. After this appearance, Whitmer had to clarify, as politicians like to do. She told the Detroit Free Press, "Perhaps the words that I used on the route were maybe a little confusing." See, what she does there is when she says it like that, maybe they were a little confusing. She's putting the blame on you. She's putting the blame on the listener that, see, you just didn't understand what she said. "Perhaps the words that I used on the route were maybe a little confusing, but they have never been any other than I support rebuilding communities and rebuilding them in a way that creates real opportunity in an equitable and just manner. I don't believe police should be defunded." That's what she said. But they're trying to have it both ways, because the activists in the streets that are protesting, that are rioting, that are taking over sections of Seattle and who knows where else, that's what they want, is defund the police, period. There's no debate. There's no discussion. It's eliminate the police. I'm not sure what they expect to happen after that, but that's what they say. The agitators have one goal: attack the police and defund them. If you don't believe me, this is the level of absurdity that they're willing to go to not give anything, a pass. This is from June 10th, written by my colleague at Breitbart, Joel Pollack. The Black Lives Matter movement is targeting Paw Patrol, the popular children's cartoon on the Nick Jr. channel, because it shows a positive view of police. Let that marinate for a second. They've set their sights on a children's cartoon because the happy dog is a police officer. So in the corporate zeal to latch on to the Black Lives Matter movement and show that all of these companies are woke, there was a Blackout Tuesday that was held, and of course Nickelodeon, which is the parent to Nick Jr., participated, and Paw Patrol, who knew that Paw Patrol had its own Twitter account, and it said they will be muting our content until June 7th to give access for black voices to be heard so we can continue to listen and further our learning. And the hashtag Amplify Black Voices, which is nice. Isn't that nice? I think it sounds patronizing to me, but that's just me. And Joel quotes the New York Times, which reported last week when the show's official Twitter account put out a bland call for black voices to be heard, commenters came after Chase, which is the dog that they want to be brought to heel. Euthanize the police dog, they said. Defund the Paw Patrol. All dogs go to heaven except the class traitors in the Paw Patrol. These are real people actually typing this to Joe Biden, Gretchen Whitmer, anyone else who is giving these people any quarter. They deserve no quarter. They will not relent until police departments are abolished. And so all of this nonsense about investing more in our communities or putting more into schools or whatever the rhetoric the feel-good rhetoric is, that is not going to be done in exchange for maintaining police forces. The radicals want the police eliminated, period. My next guest coming up is John Hayward. He's another one of my colleagues at Breitbart News. He is the National Security Deputy Editor. This week, and we're going to talk about this in the next segment, this week he wrote a piece titled Democrats Embrace the 4 Stages of Ideological Subversion. In his piece, which I encourage you to find, to look up on the Breitbart site, again, it's Democrats Embrace the 4 Stages of Ideological Subversion. His piece is based on an interview that was conducted in 1984 with a former Soviet journalist and KGB informant Yuri Bezmenov, who was explaining the 4 steps to subvert a culture. And those 4 steps are demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization. Now, he argues, and Bezmenov argues, that demoralization has been going on for decades in America, and then it led to destabilization, which we've seen over the last probably 2 decades, crisis, and normalization. So when we come back, John Hayward of Breitbart News talking about demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization, the 4 steps the left are following to take over America. This is the Kyle Olson Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. I'm joined now by John Hayward, who is the National Security Deputy Editor for Breitbart News, which is a fantastic website. So, John, thanks for joining me today. So you wrote a piece this week titled Democrats Embrace the Four Stages of Ideological Subversion, and you base it on a 1984 interview with a former Soviet journalist and KGB informant Yuri Bezmenov, who laid out this whole strategy for subversion. So can you kind of give me an overview, and then let's dive into that a little bit?
Okay. Well, Bezmenov, back in 1984, he was explaining the KGB's process of subverting a country that they wanted to move in and take over. And he said they have a four-step strategy they felt was airtight, that would always work when implemented properly. And if you look around at what's happening in the United States, I think you can see evidence of those four steps all being played out around us right now. We're looking at this being done by domestic forces, by the Democrats, I think, in order to destroy society, bring it down, submit it, basically, and then rebuild it in their own image. And they're following his process to a T, beginning a long time ago. The first stage of these four would take decades to complete, and it's been in progress for decades. And only now, I think, are we coming to the culmination of these four steps being run.
So that step that started decades ago, because as you said, in the interview that he did, which was in 1984, he had said this has been going on for decades. So talk a little bit about that demoralization. Well, let me first just say the four stages are demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization. So talk first about demoralization and what exactly that means.
Right. Well, demoralization is the process of teaching an entire generation to dislike its own country, to hate its own system so much that they won't even listen to a rational defense of it, to hate it comprehensively.
And we see this every day in schools, I think, where you have kids who, the idea that America is an exceptional country, or that individual rights or separation of powers or whatever the case may be, those are foreign, or I shouldn't even say foreign, they're evil concepts, and they're oppressive. But how do you see that playing out?
Well, I think the demoralization process has been in progress for a long time. Bezmenov said it was really done by 1984. He thought the United States had been demoralized sufficiently for the rest of it to proceed. I think we came back from that. I think he had a point. And if you remember where we were in the early 80s, you could see what he was talking about in terms of the education system and where popular culture stood at that moment. But then we rallied, the Reagan years happened. I think we came back from that. There was a resurgence to some degree of patriotism, of traditional values. And then the process was reinitiated over the past 20 years and has now borne successful fruit. And my textbook example of demoralization, the best example right now that I mentioned in my piece, was the 1619 Project, which is a New York Times project with an entirely false premise that the United States was founded by slavery, entirely because of slavery. It's called the 1619 Project because that's when the first slaves were brought to America. So that's when we were really founded. And this project asserted that the Revolutionary War was fought primarily to protect slavers and their interests, not really to obtain political freedom or become distinct from the crown for any other reason. This is not true. And a number of historians shredded this project after it came out. The author of it eventually admitted it's not true. Her thesis isn't true, but they teach it in schools anyway. It's become part of school curriculum. It's false. The people who wrote it know it's false, but your kids are still taught to believe it. That is pure concentrated demoralization.
Sure. So then stage 2 is destabilization. What does that mean?
Well, destabilization occurs after the generation has been taught to hate their country and not believe in their own society anymore. Then they have to be taught not to trust one another. And that's where destabilization comes in handy. The mechanisms of society are dismantled. Law enforcement becomes destroyed. Nobody trusts it, believes in it anymore. And they don't believe in one another. Your neighbors are all out to get you. They all hate you. You can't get ahead in life because of discrimination. Your only hope is to band together politically as a tribe and exercise raw power to get what you deserve out of your unwilling fellow citizens. That is a condition of destabilization. And you couldn't ask for a better slogan of destabilization than abolish the police. That's stage 2 in 3 words. Abolish the police is the ultimate destabilizing slogan. And all you have to do is look at Seattle today and see what that actually looks like. Armed left-wing insurrection is taking over a city and descending it into bloody anarchy and chaos. There couldn't be a more unstable place in America than Seattle right now.
And it's getting very little media, national media, mainstream media attention because, well, I think it sort of goes against the narrative. But what was fascinating to me is to see these pictures where they're erecting a fence. So they're building a wall, which they don't want on the southern border, but it's okay to build it around the situation in Seattle. What do you think that really when people see that and they just sort of shrug, and you have President Trump this week, he tweeted about that, and he basically, said this needs to be cleaned up. And the governor and the mayor essentially told him to mind his own business, which to me is a signal that they're tolerating this, and they're tolerating literally this anarchy, which is, it's hard to comprehend that they would tolerate that sort of situation in their city. But stage 3 is crisis. What exactly does that mean?
Well, the crisis is the payoff. It's the big show. After you've demoralized the population for generations, and then you've destabilized it to where there's no more meaningful law and order, and you have a condition where elected officials, responsible officials, just refuse to protect you. Like in Seattle, you're at the mercy of the mob because they don't feel like doing their jobs. Once you've got everything nice and unstable, then you hit that society with a crisis that blows it apart. And you aim for the weak point of that society, a crisis that the people feel like they can't resolve themselves, that their existing system can't handle, a crisis that they deserve, maybe, that they've got coming. This reaping the whirlwind. We're reaping what we sowed, and our past is coming back to get us now. And only an external force can possibly bring stability back into their lives. And that's where the Democratic Party will offer itself as the external force. They're going to tell you throughout the 2020 election, both implicitly and quite explicitly, that only by voting for them can you have your life back. Only by voting for them will this crisis end. And otherwise, this is going to go on forever and get worse and worse, and you're not going to like where it goes. Obviously, anything violent or spectacular could be a crisis, but I think this one's really a double whammy. We got the pandemic, we got the coronavirus, the lockdowns that clearly softened us up, rattled us as a society, destroyed our economy, unemployment through the roof, really people in a very depressed frame of mind, obviously, all across the country after dealing with that lockdown. And then boom, you get these riots and protests and unrest in the cities. And that has had the effect of destroying what little faith people had left in their system. People that have basically been under house arrest for months on the advice of medical experts got to watch many of those very same experts sign a letter that said, go ahead and protest. Your politics are more important than this stupid little virus. Go out and have your fit because white supremacy is the real enemy here. And I mean, of course, you're shocked and horrified and scandalized that people that call themselves doctors would say something like that. But also you feel like this crisis has destroyed your society. Like there's nothing left to believe in anymore because everything is so obviously hypocritical and false.
And we've seen that in Michigan where, the governor, Gretchen Whitmer, she wagged her finger at people who were protesting in Lansing because they wanted to reopen the state. They wanted to go back to work. They wanted to provide for their families. And she was wagging her finger at them saying, you're going to spread coronavirus around the state. You're going to, risk the lives of other people and all of that sort of thing. But then she appears in Detroit where she goes to a protest herself, doesn't observe social distancing. She takes her mask off to speak. And when she's challenged on that, she said, well, my executive order doesn't apply to activities that are protected by the state or federal constitution. That's her reaction.
Right. Isn't that a perfect blend of anarchy and tyranny in one person? And people should understand that's the thing about tyranny. It's not just about having strict laws and overbeing government. It's about exceptions to those strict laws being handed out for political purposes. And here you had Gretchen Whitmer, who's imposed these incredibly strict and in many cases arbitrary and capricious rules on her populace, suddenly just scribbles out a free pass for the people she likes, her political allies. You guys can go crazy. You can have any kind of a protest and rally you want, and I'll get right down there in the street, arm in arm. I'll boogie down in the streets with you. And then she's going to turn around. This is coming. She's going to turn around a couple days later and say, well, no, the rest of you don't get to do this. You can't organize. You can't have a Trump rally. You can't do whatever you want to do because the coronavirus is going to come back. And I really think that is the true crisis, the third stage of this crisis that's going to really devastate the country and send us into uncharted territory, is if we do have another wave of coronavirus, if it comes back and it's a real problem again, and we're told, okay, back into house arrest with the rest of you. All the lefty protesters got to have their fun. Black Lives Matter got to run wild through the streets. But now all the rest of you have to go back in prison because the coronavirus is coming back and we're going to put another lockdown into effect and ruin the economy again. I don't think the country as it stands can take that blow. It's going to be more than ever.
So we've only got a couple seconds left, but stage 4 is normalization. What does that mean?
That's where you get told you can have your normal life back if you submit. If you let the Democrats have power, if you vote for the right people, then and only then will you have normality return to your lives. That is the threat and the promise that's coming at us next.
John Hayward, National Security Deputy Editor of Breitbart News, Check out his piece titled Democrats Embrace the 4 Stages of Ideological Subversion. John, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me this week. Don't forget Soldier Solutions. My favorite shirt on the site says, "My rights don't end where your feelings begin." That's a message we need. That's a message we need now more than ever. You can find it at getsoldiergear.com. That's getsoldiergear.com. Use the promo code Kyle25 to get 25% off your order of $30 or more. KYLE25. Getsoldiergear.com. For more of my work, go to Breitbart.com or find me on Twitter, Kyle Olson, OL.